Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. This is Mr. Middlepath. How is everyone doing today? Inshallah, we are back with our very special guest, Brother Ibrahim from Ibrahim Education. And today we're going to be going over the $1,000,000 question. What about LGBTQ plus in public schools, inshallah? So let's get into it, inshallah, the good, the bad, and the ugly. What's going on over there? So please enlighten us, Brother Ibrahim. Brother Ibrahim. This is part two. If you haven't seen it, please watch part one first, so that this will make sense, inshallah. I'll link it in the description right now.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum. How you doing, brother?
Alaikum salam, man. I'm doing good, man. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah. So look, first, tell me, what are your thoughts on this issue?
So my understanding of what's going on, I mean, before I talked to you on part one, I was thinking, okay, this is a really big deal. They're teaching it everywhere. They're putting up LGBTQ flags in kindergarten classrooms. And then you told me it wasn't necessarily like that. So my thoughts now, unless, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, that's the point of the video, is that it's going on in some schools where they're pushing it really hard. And in some schools, there might be a nonchalant attitude. And in other schools, it might just be a don't ask, don't tell type of policy where everyone's kind of just quiet about it. And no one's really like speaking about the issue, or they're just avoiding it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I mean, Muslims ask me about it all the time. It's the thing I'm without a doubt asked about regarding schools by Muslims the most, 100%. I would not say mostly by people who actually have kids in public schools, okay? Because once you're in it with kids and going through it, tend to be worried about other things. But as far as people on the outside who have general impressions about schools, this is the thing they're always asking about regarding Muslims. You know, me, I've thought a lot about how to approach it because, you know, there is this media aspect to it. There's an aspect, one, you know, there is things to be concerned about. And I don't want to downplay that. There is things to be concerned about, like there's things in the society in general. And any Muslim, they got to be very involved with their raising of their kids in this society. You know, that's the biggest preventative thing of anything. You have to be very involved to know what's going on. You know, and there's activist groups, some who are very well funded, one especially that's very influential upon some sectors of the public school system.
Can you say the name or no?
Yeah, Gleason. I'll talk a little bit about them, you know, GLESN. So, you know, and then there's smaller activist groups. Now, the thing is, those activist groups, I do think there's an extent to which they thrive off of people's paranoia. There's an extent to that. Then there's also an extent to which other people who, even if they're against it, they thrive off the paranoia as well because it gets views. It gets views when you talk about it. And I'm not trying to say that there isn't a place for that type of criticism, but that's a reality as well. And to me, that is part of why Muslims have such an automatic association between the public school system and this issue, because it's been talked about in some of our media channels a lot, and it's commonly associated with it. And I'm not saying that those talks weren't warranted, but those talks get a lot of views. It draws people's attention because the issue is so sensitive. You know, the big thing I want to make sure people understand is there's nothing about this issue that should stop you from advocating for your kid in the public school system. There's nothing about this issue that should make you afraid of expressing your religious views and your wants for your kid to the people who teach your kid in a public school. Those people in a public school work for you ultimately. The public schools in America, they're ultimately local in nature. That is the culture, that is the laws. Now there is state laws and stuff and things we'll talk about, but that is the foundational culture of schooling in America. So you have to be active in trying to make your kids' schooling experience what you want it to be. And that is a federal right that every parent has, that has been ruled upon even recently in the Supreme Court, that parents have the ultimate right to choose to direct the education of their child. And the Supreme Court makeup right now is only lends itself to be more favorable of that. Yeah. And in 2020, there was a Supreme Court case, I think it was called like Espinoza versus the state of Montana or something. Montana had a scholarship fund to give parents money to send their kids to a private school. And they tried to pass a stipulation that prohibited those funds from going to any religious schools. And the Supreme Court struck that down on this
Wow.
basis, that if you
It's
give that money to
amazing.
parents, they have the right to direct the education of their child.
Mhm.
And that is something that's been ruled on over and over again. And you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was was one of the justices who voted against that ruling, and she's now been replaced by a justice who most definitely would have voted in favor of that.
Yeah.
So the near future, as far as law concerns itself in America, from what I can tell, and we need more Muslims in law. I've tried to reach out to some, but we need more Muslims who are in law to comment on these types of things as well.
Mhm.
But where the Supreme Court is right now, it lends itself to the future favoring parents' rights in school.
Yeah. That's one
Those,
of the big benefits that America has compared to pretty much anywhere else, actually, is that the homes. Can you hear me, by the way?
I can hear you.
Yeah, yeah. The homeschooling laws and especially like places like Europe are so strict, and in some of those countries, homeschooling is even banned. Like you're not even allowed to do it. So that's actually a really big benefit that a lot of the viewers commenting on the previous video mentioned that, and they recognize that as well.
Yeah. And you know, there's no doubt that there's people who would like America to be more like Europe in that regard, and they're making those efforts. There's no doubt. But
Mhm.
being complacent and feeling like you have no control over everything and not advocating for yourself,
It's not the way to go. Yeah.
that's the best way to let them win, you know. So so
SubhanAllah.
so 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 that's what it comes down to.
Mhm.
Now, all right, I'll start presenting some things here. So
Sure.
first, which I talk about first, the views of the dispositions of teachers,
Mhm.
or where sex ed is mandated. Well, okay.
Well, wherever you want to go, how do you want to start it?
Well, you know what? First, I want to talk about is this study on teachers. Okay,
All right, perfect.
because a lot, you know, teachers tend to vote liberal. They have a lot of economic incentive to do that because of the teacher unions. Because the Democratic Party tends to favor teacher unions in their policy, and they have a
Mhm.
very like close relationship. But there's also an impression that teachers are all like left-wing radicals or this type of thing. And that is simply not true. That is simply not true. I know that from experience. There's an academic at Louisiana Tech named Robert Slater. He did the largest study of teacher opinions ever done. He
Wow.
looked at something like over 40,000 teacher responses to a survey done from done from an organization based with the University of Chicago, who does like a national opinion survey of Americans every single year. And you know, through the information, he filtered the results to look to isolate the findings from public school teachers. So I have the
Mhm.
article here. Bear with me while I go through it. But a key finding he found is that on average, public school teachers are more socially conservative than
Yeah.
the average American. And especially if you compare them to average Americans with their same education level. Okay, so in America, there tends to be a relationship between being socially conservative and being uneducated, meaning meaning the lower educational attainment that you have, the more likely you're to be socially conservative. The more educational attainment you do have, the more likely you are to be socially liberal in your viewpoints. Now, public school teachers tend to have high education levels because they usually have a bachelor's degree and a professional certification. Many of them have master's degrees beyond that.
Yeah.
And then administrators will likely have a doctorate of some type. So especially when compared to Americans with their same education level, they're by far, on average, more socially conservative than the average American. So like, if you see here, can you see this?
Tolerance of homosexuality.
Yeah,
I think
tolerance of
is that.
homosexuality. Compared to other educated Americans, teachers have consistently expressed more conservative views on homosexuality. He shows the trends. The light blue line is non-teachers. The blue line is teachers, and their belief that homosexual relationships is not wrong at all. So you see, it follows a similar trend, but
But it's,
it's about 10 percentage points lower than
yeah, that's a big difference.
the average American. Yeah, it's a big difference. And you
And
know,
it's consistent too throughout the years.
correct, and that's a big finding because his survey looked at from the 70s up until like the 2010s.
Mhm.
So, you know, but these comparisons and these trends, they're consistent throughout the decades. You know,
Wow.
and you see here, I mean, tolerance of homosexuality is increasing in the United States. That's true, and it's true for public school teachers. But the
Mhm.
average that it's lower than the average American still holds true.
Yeah.
And I would say there's probably some age relations in this well, like younger people being more likely to be tolerant than older people, but that's the whole thing too, because the average age of the teaching population is generally old right now. There's not that many young people who are in teaching, which is a whole opportunity for us as Muslims, by the way. Like if young Muslims, if more of us were to go into education, we'd have a real opportunity to influence the system for a long time.
Do they go into why it's 10 percentage points lower or theorize about why it's so much lower?
Yeah, they're based on, he talks about how, teaching, it's an academic endeavor, but it's also a moral endeavor.
Mhm.
And many teachers, they have moral reasons why they want to go into working with children. And
Yeah.
actually, he starts off the first graph he shows. This is an interesting question. If a person wanted to make a speech in your town against churches and religion, should he be allowed to speak or not? Now, most people, of course, said they would because people in America believe in free speech. But teachers, they were a little less likely to say yes to that
Mhm.
than non-teachers with their same education level.
Mhm.
And I know I'm not sure if I had them highlighted in here, but what this graph shows of there being about 10 to 14 percentage point difference
Yeah.
between public school teachers and the average American.
Mhm.
That's consistent amongst these social value indicators. And I know attendance to religious services was one of those. So especially with people with the same education level, teachers, they're more likely than the average American to attend religious services and to be
Interesting.
religious. And, honestly, I would not bring up the results of this study if this didn't correlate to my own experience with public school teachers as well. And I
Mhm.
consult with people around the country in my consultancy business, and especially here in Minnesota. So I'm not just talking like people I've worked with at my school,
Yeah.
but I generally find this to be consistent amongst what you see with teachers. They tend to be more likely to be religious people than the average person that you meet nowadays. Let's see, teachers are about 14 percentage points more likely to oppose abortion for any reason than highly educated non-teachers. That is, they're more conservative on the issue. 50% of teachers said they would make pornography illegal, while only 38% of non-teachers shared this view. The difference between teachers and highly educated non-teachers is even greater. Only 29% of non-teachers would make pornography illegal. So that 29% number,
Almost 10 percentage points once again difference.
yeah, the average American, they're 12% more likely to say pornography should be illegal. The average American with 16 years of education, which is the least that you need to be a teacher, they're 21% more likely to say that.
Yeah.
37% of teachers say they attend church one or more times a week, while 26% of other Americans say they do so. So again, 11%.
Again, like almost 10%. Yeah, it's like very consistently.
Yep. Here's a graph on the church attendance.
Mhm.
So,
Wow.
yep. Teachers have a relatively high level of education, and the more education Americans have, the more they tend to approve of the Supreme Court's ban on school prayer. In 2006, about 50% of non-teachers were against the Supreme Court's ban on school prayer, while only 36% of teachers.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, this seems to actually be saying that that non-teachers are more likely to be against the Supreme Court's ban on school prayer than teachers are.
Mhm.
So that's not consistent with the other ones.
Interesting.
But anyway, the only point the point I want to make with this with people is you shouldn't be so afraid of the people in the schools, because it's a stereotype that like they're all left-wing radicals or this type of thing. Now there are some. There is no doubt that there's some, but the average public school teacher is someone who's a parent, and they're frequently someone who's religious, and they're not someone who's discordant with conservative social values. Again, I found this in my experience. So one thing you find with that is not only are they open-minded to whatever your view is, and teachers tend to have the view of they just, they want to make you happy as the parent of the kid that they teach.
Yeah.
And, and I've talked before about how, as a school teacher, and school administrator, you have pressures coming at you from all over. But the pressure that people will be most responsive to is pressure from parents, because no teacher or school administrator wants to have unhappy parents in their school. It's a big stressor. And, about the things like LGBT education or whatever that people are so very paranoid about. Conservative Christians in this country have their own culture already of advocating against those things and opting their kids out of those things. So that's not something that is like unfamiliar to teachers or unfamiliar to the culture of education.
Yeah, they probably deal with parents doing being angry about this for a very long time.
Correct.
Yeah.
And even I've gotten teachers who've expressed to me that they're surprised that Muslim parents aren't more proactive about it. And there are Muslim parents who do advocacy about that, but in my talks with teachers, it tends to be more reactive after something happens in the classroom as opposed to being proactive.
Yeah,
but you can be proactive as well.
Sure.
And go into sex education.
Does the Slater 2008 study actually talk about that or address that stereotype, that the stereotype that teachers are like radical leftists? Does he ever mention that in his study, or does he just not mention that?
You know, he published a whole book on it in 2013. Yeah. And his angle more is that teachers contribute a balance to democracy. That's kind of the argument that he makes in the book. That's his overall arc. But yeah, he does address that. Like it's predicated on these are findings that might surprise people.
I see. Okay, so he's aware of the stereotype, and he's like, we have to study it. Okay.
Correct. And me, you know, before I found this study, I had already come to that determination in working in public education. You know, even in an urban, highly liberal area, that teachers they're not as they're not as socially left wing as people think. And you know, when I do my trainings with people or people who've read my book, a lot of them are relieved to have these views expressed and want them expressed more in this type of thing. Okay, let's am I sharing my screen right now?
Yeah, I can see it's the state of sex education.
So sometimes I talk to people who are under the impression that, you know, what is the truth of what's mandated in schools regarding LGBT education or sex education. Now, this is not something that's federally mandated. It's state by state. All right. And, you know, even when there's state laws, what actually happens at the local level, oftentimes, even when there's state laws, the state laws stipulate that the details of it have to be managed by each individual district. And then even beyond that, as I've talked before in the previous one, teachers individually have a lot of autonomy in their classrooms.
And the teachers union protects them too.
And the teachers union protects that. So, you know, the biggest thing anyone has to do, you know, I don't advise worrying about things too much on a policy level, because that type of advocacy to me can have unintended consequences and oftentimes isn't fruitful. But if you have kids in a school, or you have a school that you went to, you know, that's a whole thing people don't think about as well. Even
advocacy on a local level is more effective, basically.
Correct. Okay. And if you went to an elementary, middle, or high school in this country, you are an alumni of that school. You know, like the materials I've put together, the book and the training materials, or whatever, you can reach back out to that school as an alumni, even if you don't have kids, and say, hey, I'd like you to know about this, or I'd like you to read this, or this type of thing. You can do that type of advocacy. You know, and as far as what's going on when laws are passed or this type of thing, a lot of times the laws will stipulate that the school district has to hold public hearing sessions on what the community wants.
Yeah, and then if the Muslims don't show up, then their voice isn't heard, basically.
Exactly. And you know, there's conservative Christian groups who will show up.
Yeah,
but they're going to be characterized as being loons, and maybe and some of them kind of are, to be honest. You know, and some of them maybe hate us. But you know, we can't let them dominate that type of advocacy. Is part of the reason as well. And a lot of this stuff, if it's pleaded for from Muslims, especially in more urban areas, that will actually resonate with school districts more than maybe the conservative Christians advocating for.
Yeah, what you're saying is absolutely true. I remember some Muslim brothers and sisters that were involved in like advocating for like not having LGBT taught in certain schools. This was in Virginia, right? This was a couple of years back, like maybe I want to say like 5-6 years ago. And what they noticed was that the people attending that hearing were much more attentive to what the Muslims wanted, because like you were saying, a lot of them are from Democrat or left political party. So they didn't really care what the conservatives were saying anyway. They're like, you guys aren't going to vote for us in the upcoming election anyways. But they were more willing to listen to what the Muslims were saying, because that was like a new group coming, and they're like, hey, well, what do these people want? Let's make sure that they're happy.
Correct. And there's a huge movement in education. There has been for a while, and it has more steam now than it ever has,
Mhm.
on respect for multiculturalism, of, of not blotting out the student's home culture, and
Mhm.
on racial equity. So so Muslim advocacy is tied with that. So like, with all these things, there's a mix of priorities. But that whole end of education, the multiculturalist ends, the anti-racist end, that is a much, much stronger force in it
Mhm.
than the pro-LGBT advocacy. It's a
However, can I like segue? Because I've seen some curriculums, because I teach too. We've looked at some curriculums, and what I've noticed is that a lot of the LGBT
Mhm,
is pushed, or the way that it's added into the
mhm.
curriculum is as if it is a culture, like as if it's your ethnicity. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? So like you're learning
Oh yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
ethnic backgrounds, and then one of the
Yeah,
chapters,
yeah.
like,
LGBT advocacy has always tried to ride the coattails of
mhm,
the civil rights movement, and
yeah,
and anti-racist advocacy and that type of thing.
mhm,
Now, this is all the more reason why Muslims need to be vocal and advocate on a local level about this stuff, because it adds a wrinkle into what people need to consider. You get what I'm saying?
yeah,
And like, more people who are more liberal in their leanings, yeah, okay, maybe they don't want to be seen as supporting conservative Christians. But if you say it's disrespecting the culture of Muslims and this type of thing,
they can listen. They're
there's a
more.
lot of schools where the climate is going to be such that they're more open to considering that angle.
Mhm.
Okay, so
So
um,
Muslims have more voice than what they think they do.
100%. And as I said before, we have a young population, and that is a source of strength for us that we do not utilize. That gives us the authority to influence schools, and influence the school system, and influence the society by extension. But we're not using that. We're not using it. And to me, there's a Muslim countries, education tends not to be local. It tends to be top down from the central government. So there's a cultural barrier there to an extent, and there's some mental blockings that people have that we need to get over. But anyway, the map you're looking at, this lays out sex education policies by state. Okay, so the ones that are in a shade of red, they have mandated sex education, and it's only about half the states in the country. The other half of states in the country, they don't even have sex ed as something that is mandated. Now, that doesn't mean sex education. I'm just talking sex education in general. Okay. And traditionally, sex education, which started in the 1960s in the United States, but there was a lot of concern over it. Sex education it has evolved over time, of course, but it was rooted in abstinence only education.
That's
And there's some,
yeah. Please keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt.
there's some states where that is still part of their policy. But
Can you talk about that actually? I have to interrupt actually. I'm sorry. Like that white line is like really, I really want you to explain that, because I feel like a lot of people watching would are like
well,
astounded
look,
that that even exists.
some of these cultural battles, the culture war in America, it's old. It's very
Mhm.
old at this point. So the advocacy for sex education started to get steam in the 40s and 50s, and it started actually happening in places in the 1960s.
Mhm.
But there was all kinds of cultural concern about it. And so when it happened, like sex education, like teaching about how sex happens and this type of stuff, and biological aspects of it, what was put into the curriculum in a lot of places. But families would really advocate that it be stipulated that abstinence only was taught. Or, and then even in the 80s with AIDS and this type of thing, then there was the push for, well, we have to teach about contraception and this type of thing.
Because
But
I'm surprised that some of these states have the white lines going through it actually.
yeah, what that means, that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't teach about contraception, this type of thing,
Mhm.
but it means that they have to include that sexual abstinence is the only way to avoid STDs.
Oh, so it's not like coming from a religious or a moral angle. It's just saying.
Well, some of them have it specifically stipulated in their state policies that the healthiest way to have sexual relations is between a married man and a woman.
Really?
And yeah, now in part,
Wow.
and some of them have laws that specifically stipulate that the school is not allowed to promote a homosexual lifestyle,
Mhm.
particularly Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi.
Wow.
Now, Alabama used to, but they recently repealed that law. So,
Mhm.
so there's trends and activism against that. But so if you want to send your kid to public school and really be sheltered from the stuff, move to Texas. And there's lots of people moving to Texas because they have laws stipulating against it. So, I mean, that's what you see with the white lines here.
Mhm.
Now, again, if a place doesn't have sex education mandated, that doesn't mean that it won't happen in a school. It doesn't mean that.
It's
But
just up to
again,
the school.
correct. It means if it is, it's happening in accordance with the school, like the school's making a decision on its own to have maybe a sex ed class. Or even beyond that, you might have a physical education class where the teacher themselves chooses to include sex ed. Okay.
Mhm.
Now that's the whole thing. So, so education about anything in that respect can happen in a school at the individual discretion of a teacher. And the individual discretion of a teacher, it's the greatest factor in what is taught at a school. Okay. But as far as it being mandated, it's only about half the states. It's only about half the states that actually mandate sex ed. I'm not talking about LGBT ed, but sex
Mhm.
ed.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. What
Now,
does that look like?
what does that look like?
Yeah, like what is like for those that don't live in the States or are watching this for the first time, like what
Mhm.
does it mean that sex ed is mandatory? Like what do they teach?
It usually involves teaching about the mechanics of how pregnancy happens.
Okay.
Okay, and then the risks associated with STDs.
Mhm.
Okay, and you do see the blue states on here, the dark blue states. Those are states that don't have sex ed specifically mandated, but they do have STD teaching mandated, HIV education mandated, and that was something there was a whole push for in the 80s and 90s
Mhm.
after the spike in AIDS and HIV in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So now, I would say for all intents and purposes, those states do also have sex ed
Yeah.
mandated if you're mandated to teach about sexually transmitted diseases.
How are you not going to teach them?
Right, exactly. Okay. So now what you see here on this is mostly fairly new, but there's 9 states and the District of Columbia where it is part of the policy that sex education be LGBT inclusive. Okay. So that means
What's the dark blue? What's the light blue?
the light blue means that it's a state where whether it's sex ed that's mandated or HIV teaching that's mandated,
Has
they
to be
have
LGBT.
the education has to be LGBTQ inclusive.
Okay.
Okay, so it has to include things about LGBT education.
Now let's
Okay,
see. Yeah, 6.
so you're talking about California, Colorado, New Jersey, Oregon, Rhode Island, state of Washington, and the state of Washington, they have a law that's kind of in process there to mandate sex ed, although even that law stipulates that they have to take that each individual district has
Mhm.
to take input from local parents to determine finally what they will actually teach.
Mhm.
Again, something Muslim parents need to be involved in. And young adults need to be involved in it too, especially, like think about the state of Washington. There's a lot of immigrants there where the parents cannot speak English, but they
Yeah.
might have or can't speak it well. So they're not going to be confident enough to go into a school or go into a school.
Or even know that they have that option.
Correct. I mean,
Yeah.
there is some knowledge about it from what I know of talking to people there. But there's parents who are worried about it, but they don't have the confidence themselves to go in front of the school board to
Mhm.
talk about it. So their kid who's in their 20s or stuff, they need to do that then.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
going
yeah.
to speak
Yeah,
on
they
behalf
have
of
to,
their
yeah.
parents.
That's true.
This type of thing. I mean, what it means in these states is in the sex education they've had before, or the STD education they've had before, they have to add things to it that include sexual diversity that they'll call, or comprehensive sex education or something like this.
Mhm.
Now, even with that, in these places, the right to opt your kid out of something is a federal right. So you can still opt your kid out. And I know it's the case in Washington. I know it's the case in Oregon. And because I've looked into those two specifically. But it's going to be the case too that the state laws that mandate this will also have an opt-out clause in it, just stipulating that it's the right of any parent to opt out of it. Now, the closest that they could get to completely requiring your kid to take those classes, number one, it could only happen in high school if the sex ed class is a requirement for graduation. That's the only way that they could make your kid take that. Even in that case, you could still opt your kid out of any unit where they're going to be teaching about LGBT or sexual diversity or this type of thing, you know, but they might stipulate that, well, they still have to do these readings and these assignments at home or something like that.
Mhm.
That's the closest that it can come to being something that is completely mandated, that your kid has to do this education. Okay. Now, again, this doesn't mean that it doesn't come up anywhere. It can come up anywhere, even outside of sex ed classes. You can have language arts reading classes where the teacher might be making an individual decision to read a book about a family where there's two moms.
Mhm.
Or you know, sometimes people, they bring in an outside, because there are organizations who will offer to come in and do units like that, where
Yeah.
they read these books that have that type of thing. You know, that can happen anywhere, but this is what exists as far as being mandated. Okay.
Can we segue off that into a specific question? Maybe we can address it later. But
If you like.
have you seen those pictures where they have those drag story time where they have the drag queens or whatever reading stories to little kids and stuff like that? How yeah, how common is that, and what's your thoughts on that program? Like
Well,
how did that even get to be a thing?
I only ever saw things with that were happening at libraries, not at schools.
Okay.
I never saw something about that where it's happening in a school. I think maybe I saw one thing where it was an idea that was proposed and then it got canceled because of paper backlash, but I might be misremembering something. But I mean, that's the type of thing I'm talking about. You know, like, so people see some scary images or stuff and someone reading in front of kids or whatever. I'm not saying that isn't real, but everything I know about that was at public libraries, not at public schools.
Mhm.
So it was a program that, you know, libraries hold, and a lot of times they're good, actually, to be honest. Libraries hold reading programs for kids all the time,
Yeah.
on the weekends and type of stuff.
Mhm.
You know, and look, some of these things do have a way of trapping immigrant families, because immigrant families are less likely to be aware of their rights and this type of thing, you know, less likely to be able to articulate that they want to opt out. And I'll talk about that in a sec, and what we can do about that. You know, and like the thing with reading programs in libraries, and I don't believe that drag queen thing is common at all. I think that happened in a few places and it got a lot of media attention. But like some of the reading programs they have at libraries, that might actually be a good thing for a lot of families to send their kids to, especially if the parents don't read English themselves and can't read to the kid in English themselves.
Mhm.
Because, you know, early, you know, being read to in early childhood.
So it's very rare that they do something like the drag queen story hour. It's just like a one-off thing that became very popular, or not became very popular, it went viral because of the nature of its like weirdness.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know of that having happened at a school. It's a
Yeah.
public library thing.
Okay.
You know, now again, like, there's going to be, you know, activists are going to try to make it happen wherever in this type of place, you know, and if for something like that to happen, I mean, I know there's been issues where city councils have had to approve or disapprove of that type of program happening at their local libraries.
Mhm.
So sometimes there's something like that. But again, this is about libraries, and no one's ever forced to go to a library.
Yeah.
It's not about schools. Now, does that mean there aren't people who wouldn't like that to happen in schools? No, it doesn't mean that. But I think a teacher is very unlikely to want to do that type of thing in a school. And if you're proactive in communicating with a school, then it's not going to happen. Now, I know of a school here in, I think it was 2008 or 2009, a teacher invited members of an activist group in here to do a unit with kids that, like I'm talking about, it featured books of family diversity, where, you know, like the kid has
Two moms and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, that type of thing, you know. And lots of Muslim kids in the class. And they went home, they told the parents about it. The parents got all mad at the school and this type of thing. I've worked since then with,
Can you talk a little bit about what happened after the parents got mad at the school? Like how did that go down?
well, I don't know every detail about it. I just know parents were mad. Some parents took their kids out of the school,
Mhm.
you know, that type of thing. However, you know, more than a decade after that, that school still has a significant portion of Muslim kids, but
Mhm.
they are more sensitive about it. Since then, I've had people from there take my training, and you know, the fallout from that was part of how they understood that there was a reason why. You know,
Yeah.
no,
How
that
do
type of
they not understand that there's a reason why? Like, how do they not anticipate that there would be a backlash?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, you're saying they from what I know about it, it was one individual teacher who made that call to do that in their class.
I see. I
Do
see.
you get what I'm saying? So sometimes you get people who are antagonistic like that. Okay. And some people who wanna push that button. All right.
Yeah.
So I know about that happening in a few instances. And actually the Muslim parents here, when they find out about that type of thing, they're pretty good about pushing back and making sure they get a meeting with the principal and talking about all that type of stuff.
Yeah,
you know, a lot of the educators I've consulted with here, they know well about the sensitivity with this because they either had an incident where that type of reactive advocacy happens, or they know it from other colleagues.
yeah.
So it's not something that's unknown about.
In that case, the teacher union would still protect that teacher that made that call. Yeah. So it goes both ways.
Correct. Now this is part of too why here in Minnesota, a lot of the Somali families, we have about 17 charter schools in the Twin Cities area, and even some in greater Minnesota that are almost 100% Somali kids. So, wow. And the estimates are, I think it might even be more, like 1 out of 3 Somali kids in the city of Minneapolis attends a charter school. Now, charter schools, the teachers in charter schools don't have unions. So a lot of times they send their kids there feeling like they have more of this control in that school and they can have more of an influence. Whereas, yes, a district school, and this was a district school, the one I'm talking about, you're correct, that teacher would be protected by the union from being fired or that type of thing. But, you know, do they want to deal with the heat from the parents? No, they don't. You know what I'm saying? So they learn their lesson that way. But that is something that people see as a benefit in charter schools. Now, on the flip side of it, I would say charter schools, I think I've talked before, they usually cannot pay teachers as well. So they have a lot of young teachers who are learning on the job in a lot of cases. And I would say, too, younger teachers, you know, I'm generalizing here for sure. It's not just, but younger teachers are maybe more likely to poke with this type of thing. Young teachers who've gone through teacher training recently, they are more likely to ask kids what their pronouns are in the beginning of the class. That is something that is increasing because because the culture of that type of thing, it's way heavier in post-secondary education than it is in K through 12 education. And that's actually part of the reason why I wanted to show that study before about the values of teachers. Because sometimes people, they're projecting their experience in college, you know, onto the K through 12 education. Because the whole asking for the pronouns thing and all that type of stuff, yes, that stuff is very heavy in post-secondary education right now. That doesn't necessarily mean it's exactly the same in K through 12 education. However, younger teachers, they're more likely to have gone through teacher training in such a way where they've been told this is an inclusive practice for you to do, to ask the pronouns at the beginning of class, that type of thing.
Idea that students I know because I've seen like some students that go to online schools and stuff like that, the teachers will ask them what the pronoun is and they'll want to make a joke, and then they'll be told by like their parents or some teachers that, hey, don't do that. Just say he, or just say you're a girl, but don't like make fun, because sometimes the students are like, oh, I want to say I'm a T-Rex, or I want to say I'm a helicopter. That's my wrong. They want to make a joke about it, but they're told not to because they could get expelled or something like that. So there is that fear that is there for at least the perception for the community when they put their kids in public school.
Okay, so now look, next slide I was going to show, because a whole other dynamic in this conversation is bullying laws, because bullying laws and policies are intricately tied with this issue in schools. Okay, now look, Muslim parents, I mean, kids are kids, but Muslim parents, they should train and emphasize, and they do, but they should train and emphasize to their kids that they need to take school seriously and they should conduct themselves in a serious manner in school. Okay. Now, what you're talking about, making a joke of that, they should not do that, because it can be interpreted as bullying. And now they don't have to compromise their religious beliefs in that. Me personally, I've been in professional developments and teacher meetings and this type of thing with my employer, not the specific school I work at, but with the district I work at, where it's been, oh, introduce yourself and say, you know, where you work, what you teach, where you were born, and your pronouns and that type of thing. Okay. And when it gets to be my turn, I just don't say what my pronouns are, and I just let it go. You know what I'm saying?
What should high school Muslims do when they're
well, my suggestion, if it's some like go around and introduce yourself thing, usually the pronoun question is not the only question. It's usually grouped with other things. My suggestion is to just not acknowledge it. Is to just not say your pronouns and let it go. And if someone says, oh, what are your pronouns, and pushes you, say the masculine ones or the feminine ones. That's what I would say. Say the masculine pronouns or the feminine ones. Just say that. That's what I would do. But the thing is, you don't want kids to do something that can be interpreted as bullying.
Yeah.
And we don't want our kids to bully in this manner. And this is an important thing for Muslims to understand about the culture in America and the culture in public education, especially if they were not here in the 80s or 90s. Because when the AIDS epidemic happened in the 1980s, that spurred a culture of bullying based on pejoratives referring to homosexual people in schools and amongst youth, and honestly amongst Christians, conservative Christians, in the 80s and 90s. So people here who were going to school, who grew up in the 80s and 90s, they were exposed to a lot of bullying going on based on the use of pejoratives for homosexual people. Some people even experienced receiving that themselves, even if they were not homosexual themselves.
Yeah.
So when it comes to this issue with bullying, there's a lot of sensitivity to it. And even people who are not LGBT themselves, if they grew up here in that environment, they have empathy towards it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now, if a kid is interpreted as bullying in that regard, that can trigger justification on the school's part to say that this kid needs like some specialized coaching, or they need some specialized teaching, or they need some specialized counseling to change their mind about what they think about certain things.
Yeah.
You understand? Okay, because, and look, sometimes with bullying, you do have to change kids' perceptions about things in order to get them to stop bullying. Do you understand?
No, I get it completely. I think
so. If a kid does some bullying in a school context that is interpreted as bullying, or makes a joke, and it can be interpreted as bullying on the basis of sexual orientation or on the basis of gender, then they've opened themselves. They've opened themselves
up to the thing that the Muslims are afraid of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. Actually,
Exactly.
there's a right way to advocate and a wrong way to advocate.
Exactly. So the kids need to conduct themselves seriously in school, and it's a serious matter. Okay. And the counseling thing is something I'll get into, because that's the area that that would raise the most alarm amongst parents.
Yeah.
When it gets into that type of thing. So this map shows. Yeah. So this map shows it just shows laws where they have specific laws against discrimination based on gender or sexual orientation, okay, or bullying. And discrimination is more like a Title IX term, meaning equality of opportunity. So and then bullying means like harassment, okay, or mistreatment of some kind. So the purple states on here, and you can look this up. You can look up anti-LGBT laws in states, or anti-LGBT laws in school curriculum. You'll find the Wikipedia article that has this map on it. So the purple states, they have laws on both discrimination and bullying for both gender identity and sexual orientation. Okay. The blue ones, which is really only Wisconsin, is sexual orientation, only, nothing about gender identity. The green ones have laws prohibiting bullying, but not discrimination. Okay. Now, in the ones where they have the discrimination piece with gender identity, that's where I think there's a bit of a battle about how that's interpreted, because that in theory means that you can't be denied an opportunity based on your gender identity, and by extension you get the theorization that if this student identifies as a gender different than their biological gender, they should be able to participate in the sports or whatever for the gender that they identify with, as opposed to their biological sex. Okay. So these things are tied up, but again, like I already talked about what I was going to talk about because of the question you asked. Like bullying is a serious thing, and you have to coach your kids to not bully anyone and to not joke about it. There's a lot of value in staying silent, and I do know this is happening. There's places where and actually too, in my trainings, in my book, I don't mention Islamophobia at all. I don't talk about that, because there's some groups out there, their angle to advocating in the public school system is to just talk about Islamophobia. and they see that as acceptable. And I don't like that because it's the whole victim status angle and that type of thing. And to me, honestly,
It has its own problems. Yeah.
correct. And in my consultation with educators, I get more concerns brought to me about Muslim kids doing bullying than being bullied.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that they don't get bullied. They do. There's all kinds of things that go on. But overall, that's been expressed to me more as a concern than
A question for you on this bullying laws map. How does the red and the purple work? And just because the state is in that purple, where it's the state laws that forbid local districts from having anti-bullying policies. I mean, obviously that doesn't mean that a kid can just make fun of people that identify as homosexual or whatever, right? So how does that actually work in terms of the law? Like what would be the difference between the red?
It's just, I mean, every district will write a policy. You'll have a pretty elaborate discipline policy written within a school district. Okay, excuse me. The policy will enumerate what is not acceptable in the school. It'll also it'll probably enumerate something of different tiers of consequences for different violations and this type of thing. Okay, so a lot of those policies, they will specifically mention you can't discriminate, or you can't you can't bully on the base of race, class, gender, religion, sexual orientation, etc. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the two red ones, South Dakota and Missouri, they've basically said it's just no bullying in general. The districts aren't allowed to say you're not allowed to enumerate those special classes. Okay.
What's the significance of that?
Well, I think it's an anti-identity politics type of thing is why that's gotten in there. That the Republican legislators in there have done that as an anti-identity politics thing. Another thing too that I'm sure is theorized is those protective classes. They're already protected from discrimination based on the Civil Rights Act and an education based on Title IX. So like I'm sure that part of what they theorize is there's no need to re-enumerate it, because it's already part of federal law. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's part of
it's a matter of principle, not necessarily going to change that a kid can just in the red state can just make fun of, whoever they want, basically.
It can. Now, look, in some states, and probably in some of those purple states, you might have districts who have policies that say, bullying's not allowed. But if it's bullying based on sexual orientation, then we're going to put them through a certain type of, reconciliation program. That's gonna teach them to have a different attitude towards that issue. And then once they have that different attitude, that will make it so the bullying doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Now, look, again, that type of thing. I had a school contact me recently. And the thing is too, sometimes schools get sued. Schools get sued all the time, actually, in school districts. And, if you get sued because it's perceived that the school allowed a hate crime to happen, that can be worse and more consequential for a school. Now, I had a school recently who contacted me because they are facing a lawsuit because they ostensibly created an environment of Islamophobia. And they had a new leader put into the school, and the new leader is doing my training, and they're interested in having the whole staff do the training as a way to reconcile, because that lawsuit has dictated that they have to take some remedial action toward the wrong that happened to this one student.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So sometimes those laws have that effect, but they can do the same thing.
They have the opposite effect too.
Correct. So, those states, which it's only two, but those states that don't have the enumeration of specific identity markers, or
it's like a double-edged sword, basically. Like it can work for the Muslim community or it can work against the Muslim community. The Muslim community just has to be aware of, how to operate.
It can. And me personally, I don't advocate that, I'm not, there's people, I don't advocate for advocating for our causes from a victim
point of view.
From a victim point of view. I believe in proactive, respectful.
What's your opinion on what is that? What would happen if Muslims were to advocate from a victim point of view or from an Islamophobia point of view? Like what effect?
It's limiting. It's limiting. It pigeonholes us.
Okay.
Because other groups have done that a lot, and it will group us with them when our cross causes are mixed at best. Okay, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's been things too, sometimes like there's been school districts who've put on the table to, because of Muslim advocacy groups, to pass a to pass like a statement, like that the school board, they're making a statement that they agree to, that they're going to do something about Islamophobia or something like that. And then when that happens, it draws a whole lot of attention from right-wing groups who take a hold of characterizing what's going on and mischaracterizing this type of thing. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Like the best advocacy to do is one that's interpersonal in nature, with actual individuals who you're close to. And the best ones are the best people to go to, if you're not involved in the system already, is the kids, is the people who work in the school where you send your kid to, or the school you went to if you don't have kids.
Yeah. So I'm getting
That's
the
the best way
vibe.
to go.
I'm getting the vibe, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, that the best way to go about it is advocating for Muslims as a Muslim community only, not connected with any other ideology or any other group. You don't want to be grouped in with like the conservatives. You don't want to be grouped in with the woke crowd. You just want to advocate as, we're a Muslim community. Strictly, this is just what we want for our children in the schools, and keeping it simple like that.
Exactly. Because
Okay.
if you don't specify, that it's related to our needs as being Muslim,
Mhm.
then it's going to get grouped with a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
And again, I wrote a book. It's called Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools. Go to abrahameducation.com, where teachers can
I will
advocate.
link it in the description,
Teachers
inshallah,
can,
and in the comments.
yeah, and I got a whole bunch of stuff here too we can put in the description
Yeah.
box as well. But teachers can access the online training course for that, which they can get continuing education credit hours for. People like it. So, I put all that together to make this type of advocacy easier for parents.
May Allah reward you.
I mean, thank you. So, so I'm glad you brought up the bullying thing. The bullying thing is an important thing. Okay. And our kids need to be they should not be bullying at school.
Yeah.
And
no, this has been incredibly informative, because I think that idea is what the Muslim community seems to be afraid of, is like that re-education stuff, or like, oh, they're going to take my kid and counsel them into something,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, I think that's going to segue nicely into, let's talk more about counseling, because counseling is the biggest thing. Now, I talked, and by the way, there's been studies too that have shown that even in these states where the LGBT inclusive education is mandated, there's still plenty of schools that are not doing it, and plenty of teachers. There's been case studies, and the CDC had a report that they looked at a group of schools, a large group of schools across those states. They found that 18 to 6, only 8 in some states, it was 18% were actually doing it, and I think the highest was 67%. So even in those states, schools and teachers are making local calls to not do it. And that's just very common, because teachers, they just rationalize that the kids aren't ready for it and it doesn't feel appropriate. And there's certain age groups of kids, especially like when they're immature, and you don't want to talk about sex with them. You want to avoid it at all costs, because it's going to
lead to all types of comments and jokes.
Okay, so let me now look, going back to this organization, Gleason. I think it's Gay, Lesbian, Straight Equity Network or something like that.
Okay.
First of all, here's where we get to the scary stuff. Okay, so like if you look at their corporate partners page, Walt Disney, Target, Wells Fargo, PetSmart, YouTube, Amazon, McDonald's, State Farm Insurance, Walmart down here, Viacom, Nickelodeon. Viacom owns Nickelodeon. I don't know why they have them both on there. Goldman Sachs, Calvin Klein. They're loaded. And to be honest, Gucci. The kids love Gucci. It's just, honestly, when I look at that, it's actually amazing that these causes haven't advanced further with all the backing that they have. And this organization started in 1990, and after the AIDS scare in the 1980s, advocacy from LGBT networks really shifted into a new gear, and the change in attitude in the society that we saw in those earlier graphs is really directly related to that.
Okay.
One second. So this group is influential, and they publish a lot of documents. If you look up, if you Google search the name of their director, You will find images
Can you zoom
of,
out a little bit because the left side of the page is cut
yeah,
off?
sorry. You'll find images of that person standing with, you know, the CEO of Disney, you know, like that. You know, recently they've done like clothing lines with Target and stuff. You
Yeah,
know,
I've seen
like
those.
I've seen their name in the store, this type of thing. So they're I mean, you know, they're you know, actually a lot of this stuff that has, even with the racial equity stuff that started in education, has moved on to the corporate world recently, and you're starting to see it.
You can choose not to answer that, but do you want to talk about how it is that so many corporations are supporting causes like this, or what made them decide to do that? Is it financial? Is it like, is there
Yeah, you know, I really don't know. I mean, I'm not in corporate America, and you
okay.
know, people have conspiracy theories about that type of thing. You know, I don't know if I'm familiar with those. I don't know whether or not they're true.
Okay.
You know, I tend to not be a conspiracy theorist, except for maybe some things. But you know, I honestly think it's mostly just like the millennials getting into the workforce. And again, like this stuff was in education before it was in corporate America. So I think like a lot of people in marketing right now, when they were doing their marketing education in the 2000s, like the early 2000s, even the late 90s, you know, what everyone is calling woke nowadays, they got that type of education when they were in college at that time. You get what I'm saying? It was around
Yeah.
back then, you know, and now they're implementing it in the real world. I think it's more stuff like
Just
that.
like a natural progression type of
Yeah,
thing.
I think so. I think so.
Okay.
You know, but again, like the stuff is seeded in the education system. You know, so this is why we need to be involved in the education system. You know, because that's how we can set the agenda for how we're understood as well.
So I can let me just challenge you very briefly on that, because if you're saying that the education system, that teachers are actually more conservative and that they actually choose not to teach these things, then how is it that this became the natural progression?
Well, what I was showing was K through 12 educators. It wasn't post-secondary
So not
educators.
college. Okay.
Okay. Like college, you know, and that's the thing too. Like a lot of people, they think about their experience in college and, you know, like what they dealt with very left-wing professors and the woke movements on there, that type of thing. And they project it on to K through 12 education. But people who go into, who teach in colleges, they have a whole different motivation set than people go into K through 12 education. People going through K through 12 education are often rooted in a care for children.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So
That makes
that's why. That's why.
that
You know.
makes sense. That makes sense.
Yep. And also too, you know, like the racial equity stuff is taken a little bit different than the LGBT stuff, because as I said, the racial equity stuff is a larger force, and the racial equity stuff, you know, I have some things. I have one video on it on my YouTube channel. I'll be putting a little bit more, and I write about it in my book a little bit. Like there's definitely good in it. There's definitely good in it that has done good for Muslims and that we can build on. And even my training kind of does that. But like with anything else, when you know, when you're a Muslim and Islam is your criteria for how you evaluate things, and there's some good and there's some bad in it. But anyway, that's a separate topic.
Yeah.
You know, so anyway, Gleason, they're heavily funded. Okay. They have they have them for sale in here, but they will give out these safe space kits. They are, I would say they are the group, them and Teaching Tolerance, which is an extension of the Southern Poverty Law Center. They have really pushed the safe space language. Again, it's not to say everything about the terminology is bad. However, like you see this triangle that they have, they will give out cards to teachers and encourage them to put them in their classroom that say like that this is an LGBT safe space. And you see that rather consistently outside the offices of school counselors. And there's a bit of there seems to me that there's a pretty close relationship between the culture of and the professional spaces of school counselors and social services. So like a lot of times you'll have a social service person in a school, you also have a school counselor. A lot of times they work closely together. They might attend the same trainings. You know, counselors might attend trainings pertaining to the world of social services as well. I would say that this community, they've been very active in the world of social services in urban areas as well. A lot of them working there, They've advocated for that a lot. A lot of people from gender studies departments and colleges have gone on to that work.
Yeah. So it's different than the teachers, different mentality.
Well, it's different, but there is a relationship between social services and schools. Okay, and school counselors, especially, they are the closest to social service offices. Okay, and to me, I just see generally that like school counselors, they tend to, if there's people in a school who've done specific trainings based on Gleason stuff or based on LGBT advocacy or this type of thing, it's more the school counselor is the most likely person to have done that in the school. Okay, and I'm not trying to make people paranoid of school counselors because they do a lot of good, and I've worked with a lot of different ones, and they do good work. A lot of times they're psychologists, but they oftentimes will put up these triangles that say this is an LGBT safe space, and that is to let kids know, kids who believe that they are LGBT, that this is a place you can come to talk about that. Okay. Now, if a kid comes and does that of their own volition, that will trigger to the counselor that they need to treat that kid in a certain type of way based on the guidelines that they've been taught. Likely guidelines that they were taught in their counselor licensure program, or in specific professional development they've done regarding sexual diversity or this type of thing. Okay. Now Gleason is the foundation of those types of protocols. They're the ones who've put them together. Now, specifically, like here's a document that they have. You see, it's called Model District Policy on Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Students. So Gleason would like this is written like it's a policy document. Yeah. You know, it has when you have it, it has like the white part and the yellow part. The white part is literally a policy document, and the yellow part is commentary on it. Yeah. Like they would literally like schools to take this white part and just put it into their policies. You get what I'm saying? Yes. I would say school counselors more than anyone in this specific situation I'm talking about, where a student has gone to them and expressed that they think that they are LGBT of some type. They will take what this document says and these types of policies as if it is the actual policy, because they've maybe been taught explicitly within their own licensure training, if not something outside that this is how you respect LGBT students.
They can also lose licensure if they don't go with follow this.
Well, you know, to be honest, that specific question is something I'm kind of trying to investigate. And I actually talked to a school counselor this week, and I'll tell you, she gave me that impression. I asked her to provide me the documentation that shows that explicitly, that like if she didn't follow this protocol, that it could compromise the law or compromise the license. She said she'd get back to me on that, so I'm waiting for her to get back to me on that. Okay.
I get that.
However, something I will say, and I'm going to show some things you can do to preemptively prevent something like this. You know, I don't, there's very few situations, I believe, where you can override the right of a parent to direct their child's education. It's a federal right. Okay. Now, again, like when you get into social services, like it's a whole other issue, because if, you know, another thing that's common in schools is everyone in the school, the teachers, the staff, whoever, is what you call a mandatory reporter, which means that if they suspect that a child is getting abused, they're supposed to.
They must report it.
They have to report to the local social services agencies. A lot of times those agencies target Muslim communities. They target minority communities, to be completely honest. Okay.
Do you know why that is, or do you have an idea of why that might be?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, because a lot of times there's studies that might show that abuse is more likely in African American communities. Certainly, and that's the thing here in America. Like, you know, any type of study is done by racial demarcation. Like, you know, they don't track. Sorry, the camera's.
No, that's no problem. That's no problem.
They don't track religious demarcation, but they will track racial demarcation. So like I've seen things that say that Asian Pacific Islander students, you know, that's one of the racial categories in America. I've seen things that will say that they're more at risk to to not be accepted by their families if they're LGBTQ. Okay, and now this document here, it talks, it will cite studies that say that a child who identifies as LGBTQ, who is not at risk, who is not accepted by their family, who doesn't have their identity accepted by their family, they're more at risk for all these negative health indicators, including suicide. They're more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to use drugs. They're more likely to partake in illicit sexual activity, all that type of stuff. That's actually the group. That's actually the group. And you posted on your community post my video showing how the trends for those things have all gone down as we have more and more immigrant communities.
Yes.
Now, the group of adolescents who are most likely to exhibit those negative health indicators are LGBT students, are LGBTQ adolescents. Now, how is that data interpreted from here to there? I mean, if, you know, obviously, like most people in gender studies departments and people who take it as a profession to look closely at this stuff, you know, they will say it's, you know, it's because that this primarily happens because of the risk that they face when their identity is not accepted. And something that they will cite for that is studies that show that students who identify as LGBTQ and their parents accept it, they have better health outcomes than students who identify as LGBTQ and their parents don't accept it. Okay. Now, within like these protocols here, you can search the word parents. Family. Like, you know, it will specifically say, that, you know, it will say like you need to try to work with families and stuff. But if a family rejects a student's identity, well, actually, it might be worth it just to read this whole page. Okay, parent-guardian involvement. The parents and guardians of transgender and gender nonconforming students can play a critical role in establishing a safe and affirming school environment. Transgender and gender nonconforming students are coming out and transitioning at earlier ages. Schools should work with supportive parents and guardians whenever possible to establish healthy communication and ensure the needs of these often vulnerable students are met fully. Unfortunately, however, some transgender and gender nonconforming students face family rejection, which can result in negative outcomes, such as abuse or rejection from the home. Schools are responsible for ensuring a safe and affirming environment with equal opportunity for all students. The model policy aims to encourage supportive engagement with parents whenever possible, and to prioritize the safety and well-being of students. Staff should take guidance from and work collaboratively with the student to ensure that the student remains safe both at school and at home. This may include, for example, determining what information to share with student parents or guardians, identifying resources that could assist the parents or guardians to better understand how to support their child, and how to communicate with the student's siblings as well as staff or other students. Schools can play an important role in providing a place of acceptance for transgender and gender nonconforming students. Schools may be the only safe space where a student feels comfortable fully expressing their gender. Therefore, it is critical that parent-guardian approval is never a prerequisite for respecting a student's chosen name, appropriate gender, and pronouns. So that's a whole thing, okay? If a kid, according to these guidelines, and again, from, you know, I've explained how this is tied up in like counselor licensure and that type of thing.
Yeah.
How can you know, and how it can be caught up in school policy. And, you know, there are places where they will, you know, and there's a strong push. The advocacy is that, like those places where you have the anti-bullying laws based and the non-discrimination laws based on gender identity and sexual orientation, there's people who interpret it, that means this. That means what Gleason says. Yeah. Okay, there's strong pushes for that. You know, I think, I don't know for sure. People should ask legal experts, and I'll continue to dig more into these things. But I think most of that is yet to be played out fully in case law and this type of thing.
Have you heard of some of these laws where, I mean, while we're on the topic, right? When can they re-educate a child without the parent's permission? Or when can, because I've heard of, especially like in Canada and some other countries, like new laws have been passed where they can actually just simply take, I don't want to say, I don't know the full extent, so I might be speaking without knowledge here. but like this may be sensationalized, but they can just take the child from a family or decide that if these parents are unfit for having these.
Correct. So
Yeah.
I know of that happening in Canada as well,
Hmm.
where where families, where students have expressed to the school that they're gender nonconforming or this type of thing. The family has not accepted that. That has been interpreted as family abuse, and the
Hmm.
child has been taken away from the family.
Yeah.
I know that has happened in Canada. So like, I mean, like the thing is, I don't know the specifics about laws, but
Hmm.
to be honest, laws are often written in vague language. So when they're written in vague language, it's up to the people in the actual offices to make their own determination a lot of times based on what that means. Okay. And then they ostensibly are supposed to make their decision based on what research in their profession says. Okay. Now, I haven't looked into the specific studies myself, but it's an important dynamic to understand that within this type of advocacy, they have things they will cite that state if a family doesn't accept it, the child's more at risk.
Hmm.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So they can interpret that linguistically to mean abuse, and then use that, hide behind language to like.
Correct.
But I think
Correct.
that is the fear. Like we finally got to
Yep.
this point where that is
Correct.
the fear, that Muslims will advocate for
Correct.
their kids at school.
Yep.
The school or the government will say, "Oh, all of you are abusers, and we're going to take all of your kids away." I mean, and we'll put them all in like some type of
Correct.
camp or something. So that is like the fear, I think. So can
Yep.
we address that and how likely that is, or like?
Well, look, I mean, again, this is part of why I started off by sharing the thing about teachers and their general
Yeah.
disposition. Okay. Because I don't, it's not anything that should make you so afraid that you are, that you're unwilling to advocate. Now, look, something you can do. Again, this federal right to direct your kids' education is important. Okay. Understanding school choice, because most states have some degree of school choice now. Okay.
Mhm.
And I will tell you, the overall culture in schools is you want to keep parents happy. Okay. The overall culture in schools is not that you're working against parents. The overall culture in school is that you want to keep parents happy because they're your customers. And there's a
Yeah.
dollar figure amount on every kid's head. So if they take them out of the school, you lose money. Enough families take their kids out of the school, you got to cut staff. And no principal wants to have that conversation in the spring when it comes to budget time.
Yeah.
And that's where too Muslim families oftentimes they have kids in schools in large groups because we're a more tight-knit community than most communities.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So we have the chance to wield enough power to have what we want in here. Okay.
I see what you're coming from.
Now look, I don't necessarily endorse this organization. I don't know too much about them. They're clearly a right-wing organization, parents' rights and education, but they do have some things on here. Something that they have a bunch of these documents. We can share this link in the description.
Mhm.
They have these opt-out forms. Okay. And this type of counseling that I'm talking about, you can preemptively opt your kid out of that. Now, we'll put the links in the description box, but this organization, Parents' Rights and Education, they have templated opt-out forms for this
Mhm.
stuff. Now, again, like, that federal right, and I'm not a lawyer, and we should get lawyers to comment on this and this type of stuff. Muslims who can should seek legal counsel if they want to take this action. And I've reached out to some people, inshallah. I'm hoping to be able to provide people with more information regarding that. But basically, the right to direct the education of your child, that's a federal right. So none of these laws can override that. So what this organization put together here, this is a prior opt-out notice regarding healthcare, mental health care, psychological screening, or counseling of my children. So it's a template, and it informs the school and the school district that you are stipulating that with your kid, your informed consent as a parent is required before they received any school or school-based healthcare counseling related to mental, physical, or health, behavior, mental health, depression, suicide, psychological behavior screenings, this type of thing, or anger, like all this type of stuff. Okay, it's pretty well written out. It stipulates this isn't a complaint against a school, rather it's an exercise of parental rights made necessary, whatever. Okay. So, if parents are really paranoid about this type of stuff, if we're really paranoid about this stuff, there is action that can be taken. Be proactive. You can download this or write up something like it yourself and just stipulate what you want for your child. And I think this is a decent form.
Mhm.
Before that, I would say just make sure you're involved with your kids on a day-to-day basis, eating dinner with them every day, having a good relationship with them. I have all kinds of videos of that on my YouTube channel, my Instagram page, people can talk to, because I don't think it would be a concern of any of this type stuff coming up from a
If you were
child.
good with your kid in the first
Correct.
place.
From a child who has a good connection with their parents. I don't think that would, and that's the whole thing about like reacting to scary stories in the media and stuff. There's all kinds of questions as to what really is going on there beyond the little snippet you get in the media story. You get what I'm saying?
So how likely, so let's address that, like let's try and like bring it all together now. Like how likely would it be that a
Something I
parent,
want to point out too, we'll put in the description box. They also have an opt-out form with instructions regarding sex ed.
can you read some of it? Because that was what my question was going to be on.
Yeah. So
they need prior notification.
Yeah, parents and guardians have legal rights to be notified in advance of any instruction on human sexuality or HIV/AIDS. My child is not to receive any instruction about human sexuality, HIV, without my receipt of prior notice and sufficient time to review all of the materials, plans of instruction, including all school-wide surveys, programs, and projects that address human sexuality or HIV/AIDS.
Is this also for LGBT, or is this like, do they have a section
human,
LGBT? Okay, or is that
human sexuality, and that's the thing. Like,
human sexuality.
Human sexuality. Look, like comprehensive sexual education is a term that's commonly used. Sexual diversity is commonly used. I would say if you're going to do this, they have the right they have the right language here. As we looked at with the laws, its initial policies are initially written about sex education in general. Then you have other ones that came later about HIV or STDs.
Okay.
So any type of education about LGBT stuff that's in the curriculum, it's going to be done under the umbrellas of those types of classes. Now, another place where it can come up in the liberal arts classes, like social studies, or or language arts at the discretion of the teacher. Okay. So like, if a social studies teacher wants to teach about Stonewall along with the civil rights unit, okay, or if a language arts teacher wants to do a unit on respect for diversity, and again they include one of these books or that type of thing, actually, so maybe something could be added to this that stipulates that you want to be notified and review all materials regarding human sexuality education
in general
for any class. For any class, so and again too, if you have, say you have a school and just five Muslim families submit a form like this, the administration at school is going to come together and say, okay, this is a thing. They might ask to talk to the parents. If the parents articulate themselves maturely, they will put the word out to the school. Hey, these families need to know before you do anything like that. And if you have enough of a population of Muslim students in the school and families who are on board, the school will probably make a decision. You know what? It's probably best we just stay away from that. And I know plenty of schools where that is their general disposition. They know.
What about one family? What if only one family was to do that? Because my question is going back to the counseling and all of that and this whole. So is it possible, for example, like, because you were saying, again, the social services targeted to these poor communities, a poor Muslim family wants to advocate, and then they hit him with, oh, well, you're actually abusing your child and we're going to take your child away now.
Well, again, that's why I think this form is a good idea, because this form will preempt any of that individual counseling stuff, because it will stipulate that they have to inform you first. Okay. The good thing too about forms and written communication, number one, just in Western culture, that stuff is taken very, very seriously. And part of the reason it's taken seriously is when you have written communication about it and it's professional, now you've built a paper trail. Okay. So as I was saying, schools don't want to get sued. So if you give this preemptive form, now you flip the tables, where if they do something that goes against what you stipulated you want for the kid, you can make the claim that the school psychologically damaged the kid by not following what you said. They disrespected your rights. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So preemptive paperwork is good. Now, you shouldn't only communicate with paper. You should have real world relationships with people. If I were a parent who's concerned about this or wants to advocate, I would go to the open school nights at the beginning of the school year or whatever, go to parent teacher conferences or whatever, try to meet the principal, just tell them there's some particular thing concerning my student that I want you to know about that I'm going to send to you about in an email. Okay. Educators get that type of thing all the time. They might just think, oh, they have a peanut allergy or just this type of thing or that type of thing, I mean, schools get all the time. LGBT families, they do that all the time. Like, oh, I want you to know that this child has two moms, that type of thing. Okay. So you can just let them know, meet and greet.
How does a
Hi.
school navigate having so many different requests from like a LGBT family and then a Muslim family and this family and that family, and then the counselor? How's he going to navigate
when there's, tending to specific needs with students is something that's a huge part of what you do in a school. Okay. The different needs belong to different departments, basically. So if it's a medical thing, it belongs to the nurse. Okay. If it's something like a peanut allergy or a vision issue or asthma, so some of these issues would go through the counselor. Okay. If the kid wants to be withdrawn from certain thing, the parents have stipulated that, it's probably the counselor is going to do that. If they have specific needs regarding language, that's something that I've handled in schools, being a coordinator for English language learning. Okay. So there's different things in place for that. Even with like the way schools can work, like in my school, we have the online attendance system. There's little indicators next to the kid's name sometimes to indicate if they have special needs. So if they have an allergy, there's a certain symbol next to them, and you click on it, it tells you what the allergy is. If they have asthma, there's a certain symbol next to it. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like those types of needs are met. But occasionally, but you'll get all staff emails from the counselor saying this student ID, has to be withdrawn from this or that or whatever.
So I have some concluding thoughts that I want to offer, and I want you to, you can like agree with them or refute them, but these are just my thoughts, and like the floor is open to conversation. Like I think number one is something that I want to do perhaps in the future is try to get a legal specialist on board with this. And maybe all of us could do it together, because my specific question is, okay, the fear, it seems that some of the fear that the Muslim community has is warranted in the sense that, this is like the counselor can come talk to the kid and say, okay, I have determined that this kid is identifying as whatever he's identifying as, and that this family is being abusive. We need to call Child Protective Services now, the ball rolling, in order to take the kid away. And it's like a game of like, oh, well, I legally have this paper that said you weren't supposed to counsel him in the first place and you damaged him. And then the counselor trying to circumvent that. So it's like, it could be a sticky legal battle where the only person that can win that game is a family that is been in America for a while, knows the culture, knows the language, and has the adequate resources to advocate for their child in that way, or to win the legal battle. Now, am I saying that legal battle is going to happen? No, it's not likely that it's going to happen, and that a school's even going to be willing to fight that battle out. But if it were to happen, or if, as you said, social services were to target some of these poorer communities, the poorer communities would be ill-equipped to even deal with that. So they might want to avoid something like this altogether, which is probably why there is not a lot of proactive proactive advocacy. These are my thoughts. I would like to hear your response.
Well, I mean, it's inherent to America's legal system that it's easier to navigate for some people than others, and of course, the more resources you have, the more you can do it. I mean, that's inherent. That is, and I understand you're just trying to think through all the consequences and this type of thing, but I mean that is something just inherent to the American legal system. But look. If you give that document to you think a school counselor wants to deal with that headache? Okay, you submit this documentation to them. They're going to take it seriously. They by not taking it seriously, that might put them at risk of losing their license if they have a complaint filed against them or this type of thing. You get what I'm saying? So I think the type of situation, you're talking about a situation where the person in the school is really trying to be predatory towards the Muslim families.
Yes.
I'm telling you, I really don't think that exists very, very much at all. And that is where the media paranoia and stuff, that's where that gets to me, because sometimes we imbibe that idea that, okay, there's someone out to get to us, when there is not. Okay, I've talked a few times to school counselors who had one of these situations with Muslim kids. Sometimes they were LGBT themselves, and they were much more open-minded about everything than you would imagine. Okay, they did not have, they still had these dispositions taught from like the type of stuff I showed you, and it's like, well, it's my job to prevent them from harm and all this type of stuff, But I also called them out, and I'm also able to call them out in some of the stereotypes they might have about Muslim families, this type of thing, and they're responsive to it. Is what I have in my limited experience of talking to people with this. But like the idea that there's predatory people out to stick it to the Muslims on this issue, I don't really think that's the case. Most people, most people are uneducated about us, is what comes down to a lot, and that has to be a whole part of this. And me personally too. I don't know if this podcast will get a lot of attention or whatever. I get asked about this stuff all the time. And part of the reason I'm doing this is to have the spot where I talk about it.
Yeah.
In my book, I talk about gender roles. I talk about Muslims' expectations with gender and with marriage and sexual relations and this type of thing. And I tell schools that anything involving sex ed or romance in the curriculum, they should hold a parent meeting where they proactively educate the parents on all the materials that are going to be used regarding any of those things, not just in sex ed, but also in language arts, social studies, or whatever. But I don't mention LGBT specifically because, one, it's implied there, and number two, like, I don't want this to be the thing that I'm constantly talking about, because there really is so many other things.
There's so much more. Yeah.
I'll tell you, our kids, they're probably being put into lessons where they're doing things and made to commit shirk more commonly than something like this is coming up. Seriously, you understand? That should be a more serious thing. And and also too, another thing I talk about in my train and book, we don't want to be educating people about ourselves as Muslims from a place of conflict, because we're always put in that position. Whether it's societal level, okay, the Taliban does this, and that. Now someone wants to talk to us about being Muslim or what we think about Muslims and this type of thing. Otherwise, we're not talking about it. Or on a smaller level, we get invited to the Christmas party. Now we got to talk about being Muslim when there's some sort of conflict. Do you get what I'm saying? So, we have to proactively educate people about being Muslim, proactively, where it's not from a place of conflict, and where we can put them into a structured learning continuum where they can learn about Islam and the interplay of Islam in our lives properly. And that's why I put my book and materials together, so we can do this with public school educators. So that's a better point for people to continue to begin from, rather than trying to poke at this issue from the start. And I would say too, a parent who's most likely to advocate for this, they're probably one of the parents who's already involved with their kid. And these issues don't normally come up with parents who are involved with the kid already. You know what I'm saying? So for them, like me, I've not submitted that form to my kid's school, because I'm not personally worried about it.
Yeah.
Neither with the school or with what I know about my kids. You know what I mean? But of course, I have told them about my book and this type of thing, and that's the better route of advocacy. Okay, proactive, and then you can get to this issue in its proper place. Okay, and again, like, we have to make people understand that our religious beliefs are not something individually subjective. Because when you teach them about Islam, they learn about its sourcing. And I do all this in the training.
Yeah.
They come to understand that, because the place that people want to go is like, well, can't you interpret your religion some way? And so you accept this and that type of thing, because that's what they're used to from their own experience in the West, So once they understand that Islam is a text-based religion and that it's about adhering to what the texts say, and then you take out this element of individual subjectivity, and these conversations can start happening differently. Another thing too, because this whole thing is wrapped up with suicide statistics, some of our Muslim professionals in the area of mental health and in medicine, they need to address this issue a little bit. Because these statistics are all generated, so it's taken as like a baseline thing amongst the counselors or whoever. Oh, a parent or a child whose parents doesn't accept this, they're more likely to commit suicide.
And that's it.
So we have to be very protective. Well, what does that mean in the context of Muslims? And we know, and I have some videos on it, But in the Muslim world, the rates of suicide are way down. And some people in the West, they've tried to claim that those numbers are skewed. I have a video refuting that as well. Now, there was a more recent study that came out done by, what's that organization? ICPU, like Institute for Social Policy, something. It's a Muslim group. It's a Muslim group. And I think it was involved with Stanford and this one sister who's a Stanford psychologist. They had an organization do a survey for them, analyzing suicidal tendencies, reported suicidal ideation from people based on religious identity. And it found that the numbers for Muslims was higher than the other faiths. This is people in America. Okay. So that study could be used to say that a Muslim student who identifies as LGBT, that study could be used to like doubly say that they're at risk for suicide. And that can heighten the anxiety even more.
Yeah.
Then do those people know about the statistics in the Muslim world that show that a Muslim identity is actually decreases the suicide risk?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And this is not really the conversation for me to have, but our Muslim professional,
Muslim professionals dealing with the issues correctly.
Correct. They need to address this. And my advice to Muslim professionals, I get worried with Muslim professionals too often. They're insecure when they go into these positions, and they're too worried about fitting in. And so they're too worried about agreeing with what everyone else is saying, and we have to not be afraid to do that.
I agree.
We have to really look at things objectively and scrutinize and stick up for ourselves where need be.
So I think that was very well said. I think in conclusion, then, it's that there are some things to be worried about, obviously, but if Muslims advocate for things wisely, then that'll give us more power. And by not advocating at all, we actually lose power. And the idea that we have a lot to be afraid of, or the government will take our children away, that idea will lead us to a road where we don't advocate for anything, and then the schools will do whatever they want.
Don't be paranoid.
Yeah.
Don't focus on this issue as your point of advocacy for sure. And advocate proactively. If you're just reactive, then people can control you. And if you want to advocate in the school system, either with your children's school or the school you went to, please recommend my materials to them. Email them. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to buy it yourself. Email them, send them a link to Abraham Education, recommend the course. The name of it's Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools. The book is the same name. It's available on Amazon.
Inshallah, next video, we can talk about actually having Muslims themselves being teachers. And I think that would be even better, inshallah. And Jazakallah khair, thank you for coming on. Thank you for teaching us. It's been very educational. I really appreciate it. The time, the effort, the stats, everything. I very appreciate it. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for talking about this.
My pleasure. Jazakallah
unspoken about issue. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You gonna just stop the recording?